In 2012, I saw a new visual identity for an institution called SALT Istanbul. And when I saw it, I was floored. It was everything I loved about this kind of projects. It was elegant and smart, well executed, but also open and adventurous in both conceptual and technological ways. For those who haven't seen the identity, and it has been changed in the last, I think, year or so, the identity was based on a new typeface and a type system. It had 4 letters, S, A, L, and T, being different from the rest of the typeface, and changed every few months. Thus, these 4 letters became not only a flexible identity wordmark, but they also became a curatorial space for introducing different type designers through commissions, and also for showcasing new technologies. For example, this was the first case where I saw the multiple colors type technology being seamlessly applied. This was the work of the New York studio Project Projects, where our guest, Giampietro, was a principal partner between 2010 and 2015. Before that, between 2003 and 2008, he led his own firm, Giampietro & Smith, creating work for clients such as Knoll, Target, and others from the art and cultural sectors. He was also teaching and writing for different independent visual cultural journals, such as ... whose members we had last year on the stage, Moose Magazine, and Kaleidoscope. Then, between 2015 and 2018, Rob worked at Google as creative lead for various projects, such as the launch of the Google Design website, the customization of material design, visual language, and system of components, an overhaul of the Google Fonts directory, including new typeface commissions, and started and curated SPAN, Design and Technology, a series of global conferences. After that, between 2018 and 2020, Rob worked as Director of Design at MoMA, reimagining a holistic design system and visitor experience with in-house and agency creative teams in support of the museum's historic 2019 reopening. He then went back to Google, where he was a co-founder and active chief of staff for Insight and Innovation, a multidisciplinary human-centered team doing research to key strategic questions of today, including the needs of new and emerging AI development. He is currently living in New York and working as a brand and creative lead at Notion, a connected workspace for individuals and teams. Rob's work focuses on the intersection of design, culture, and technology through strategic inquiry, brand-focused storytelling, and multidisciplinary human-centered design. And in this presentation, we'll go deeper on key projects from across his career. I also think there's not many people who have done on the scale and type of projects that Rob has done, and it's my great pleasure to welcome him to the stage. So, Rob, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you, Aydin, for that beautiful introduction, for the invitation to come. Thank you, Cukrarna, Indigo Festival. Always such great design talks here, amazing curation of the festival. So I'm just really excited to be taking part and also to be enjoying with you the performances and conversations to come. So I kept the talk tonight very simple. I realized, I was sort of looking through it, and I realized that it covers work from 2003 to 2013. And so I was sort of 20 years into my journey as a designer, and I very simply just sort of wanted to take this time with you to look back. And so, this is a little bit of what that time looked like. As Aydin very well summarized, I had two independent studios, one which I co-founded and the other which I joined as a principal. The first was Giampietro & Smith, the second was Project Projects. And then I spent some time at Google, then MoMA, then Google again, and I'm now at a company called Notion. And just out of curiosity, has anyone heard of Notion here? Has anyone ever used the software or anything like that? Wow, okay, a few hands. Okay, that's exciting. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a sleeper hit. It's actually, we have 1 billion followers on TikTok and are a beloved brand by Gen Z. But it's really odd because it's actually productivity software. It's docs, project management, wikis, and knowledge base together in a seamless workspace. And it's used by a lot of architects and designers, artists. So if you haven't checked it out, I encourage you to give it a try. My team there is made up of 3 different groups. There's a group that works on the website. So I have designers and engineers working on that. A group that we call the studio, which is a creative team that is videographers, also illustrators, and designers, of course. And then there's a campaigns team that gets to work on all of our advertising campaigns, our major launches, and kind of building brand awareness. So we keep all of our portfolio in Notion. So this is a look at the product. I just thought it was a good way to sort of show it to you if you hadn't seen it before. And just to these are a few of our recent projects. So we just had a back to school campaign because a lot of students use the project. But also a lot of people when you work at Notion, you get a black and white portrait of yourself drawn by Roman Muradov, who's our illustrator. And because so many people that use our product want their own version of this, we're trying to figure out a way to sort of have a modular set of faces that people can make their own portrait with. And then we also make business cards and blankets and all kinds of other amazing things as a creative team. So I'm about 6 months in there, and I'm excited to have a lot more to share soon. But I've been using the product personally for the last few years. I first actually learned about it at MoMA from a young member of my team, and then over the course of the pandemic, I enjoyed kind of learning along with the community about how to use the tool. And I have a collection of about 3,000 design and art books, and I'm slowly putting my library into the tool so that I can make notes on my books, or find things, which place are they in, which shelf are they on, and I also have CV recipes and other types of projects stored away in there. So that's just a little bit about Notion. But going back to kind of the beginning of the time that my talk will cover, about 20 years ago, in September of 2003, I didn't imagine that this was what I would be doing. I started Giampietro and Smith with my friend Kevin Smith. We'd worked together for Bill Drentel and Jessica Helfand before, and we had a mostly print-focused studio doing work for culture and nonprofit institutions like Gagosian Gallery or the United Nations, for which we designed this 5-year Millennium Goals Development Report. We worked on the NYC 2012 Olympic bid with Brian Collins of the Studio Collins that blanketed the city for a couple weeks. And I also worked on a number of alternative publishing projects at that time. So I helped do the New York launch of a magazine called Topic, which was a nonfiction quarterly that was edited by David Haskell, who's now the editor-in-chief of New York Magazine. And my creative collaborator on that was Stella Budby, who's now the editor-in-chief of the New York Times Style section. So it was an amazing kind of launching pad for many of us kind of working in publishing in New York at the time. And I also, when I started Giampietro, started to archive and share my writings and research online. My blog is called Lined and Unlined. I still try to maintain it and keep it active, but I also experimented with ways of publishing that. And so this was a series of postcards that I sent to all of my subscribers over the course of a series of weeks called Post by Post. And it was basically trying to sort of connect with them more directly and less digitally. In 2010, I transitioned to Project Projects as a principal, and I joined my co-founders, or the co-founders of the studio, Prem Krishnamurthy and Adam Michaels there. And I was really there to kind of grow our interactive work and give more dimension and research to our brand work. So I was teaching at SVA, helped Debbie Millman establish the SVA Masters in Branding program. And so a lot of my research for that was beginning to merge into some of our project work. So the work for SALT was really building upon research into cultural identity, work that I had also presented at Artist Space in New York at the invitation of David and Stuart. And so some of that is also on my blog if you're interested in it. And I was also teaching at RISD at the time, so sort of one thing led to another. It was sort of like the SALT work led to work doing the RISD Museum identity and website, and then we also did a number of sort of digitally focused cultural projects like this identity for the Academy of American Poets and their insanely large website, poets.org. So some really wonderful projects there. I joined Google in 2015, and I was really coming in to help be the site lead of their New York studio to help grow the team there, and also grow the presence of our design outreach at Google. And so that began with launching the first Google Design website at Google I/O, which is the big developers conference every May that Google has. And that was really a sort of another publishing vehicle to start to collect first as a team. We had to find the stories that we wanted to tell, and then collect and sort of tell those stories and share them with others. And then, early on in my time there, we were sort of in between cycles of material components. So every few years, Google refreshes its design system and adds, more functionality to it to support the teams at Google and the third-party developers that use the system. And so basically, we were in between cycles of development on that, and I saw an opportunity to bring Google Fonts and the Google Fonts team, which was part of Google Docs at the time, over into material design and begin to work with them on applying our material design components to the Google Fonts directory. And so, the Google Fonts directory before was sort of a very rough and tumble, kind of like, very engineering-looking kind of search interface. And material design, in the meantime, only used a single typeface, which was Roboto. And I think my thesis was, don't designers need more than one typeface most of the time? And so we really took a look at how could we make this this tool much more usable for designers, and how could we also add typefaces that we felt were really of the exemplary examples of what you could do with open source typefaces on Google Design. So, so that was really fun. I also launched the SPAN conference, which we'll talk a little bit about, and we even worked with museums like the Design Museum in London to bring objects from Google's design history into the exhibitions there. The major effort that I worked on was Google Material, and I'll talk over this film as it goes, but this was basically the logo. Google rebranded in 2015 just as I was arriving, and we had a new logo, but we didn't have branded components that complemented that logo. So other than putting the new logo everywhere, we didn't have a way of sort of reminding people of the identity outside of that. So what we needed to do was sort of adapt our typeface into a full-featured typeface that was internationalized and had different weights and kerning and spacing for all applications. We also needed to sort of refine our color palette to make sure that it was accessible to users with different visions and things like this. And then we also, Google often refers to its brand as colors on white. And so, we wanted to sort of remove some of the lines and the sort of distracting elements of the app canvases so that they were much cleaner and whiter, actually, so that it was a little bit more elegant to use. And so, everything from colorizing the shadows so that we have like blue tints in the shadows, to making every one of these buttons and things something that any developer at Google could call and bring into their interface with a very simple line of code. This is what it looked like before. And here you'll quickly see kind of these branded components and these whiter canvases and how they all kind of come together. So that was a really amazing project. Here you're seeing it on desktop as well as mobile, working with Gmail, Photos, all the consumer products and things like this. So it's a really kind of amazing project, and the cycle has turned again. So Material U is the new interface language. So some of this work is now getting sort of refreshed with that language. But very, very proud of being able to play that role in leading the team that sort of really pioneered this work. And then in 2017, I got an opportunity to move into research and machine intelligence at Google. And I was really torn because I was having a blast on the Material team, but I was so interested in the things that I could really only do at Google, and one of those felt like AI, which was a really emerging, it was an established field, but it was really, there was a clear energy and excitement around it at that time. 2017 was actually the year that the Transformer, the famous paper about Transformers, Attention is All You Need, was published. And the Transformers are a machine learning model that is the T of ChatGPT. So that kind of, that really was, it was a very exciting time and a very interesting group of collaborators. And I was able to, with a few others, bring together a team of lots of smaller teams that were scattered throughout Google Research doing independent work. We were able to bring those teams all together into a team called AI UX. And there we did a number of things. I mean, first of all, we started to publish some of our thinking about human-centered AI on Google Design. So it was a great way to sort of work with my old team. We also launched a number of kind of hacker kits called AIY at stores in the US. So you could buy these and play with AI and hack things with Google Chips. This is a camera. There was also sort of a speech recognition cardboard box, building on the legacy of Google Cardboard. And then I also got to work with teams on prototyping new features for the Pixel phones that used on-device intelligence. So this is not AI going up to the cloud, but AI working on your device locally. So that included work with, and it was mostly work with the sensors on the phone. So this is telephony work for Google Duplex. So this is sort of a call, not the voice, the computer synthesized voice part of Duplex, but the one that can screen your calls for you and help you decide whether you want to pick up or whether it's spam or not. This is a concept called entity detection, which is very familiar to you now. It's in almost every modern smartphone, but at the time it was a way that you could basically wave your camera over a text object, and it could detect things like phone numbers or websites live through the vision, the computer vision lens. And then this is something called Top Shot. And that is basically that when you signal your intent to take a picture, we actually start rolling a video buffer so that if you happen to take a picture a little bit later than you want and someone's eyes will close or something, we use machine learning there's a little like white dot there that suggests maybe there was a better photo that you could have taken. So it allows you to sort of like scroll back in time a couple seconds and adjust your photos. So these are all kind of examples of like, I think we hear about AI a lot, and it's really like this, massive thing that's going to change everything that we do, and that may well be, but I think it's these little improvements to products that actually improve our lives that I think I get really excited about. So I think with the exception of MoMA on this list, that covers a little bit of my work to date, and we'll get a bit more into MoMA in a minute. But I did want to mention a little bit of these sort of other roles that I've had, these non-official roles. Curating talks at the Aspen Ideas Festival, doing independent research at as a Rome Prize Fellow at the American Academy in Rome, and continuing throughout my career to teach and write about art and design. And in fact, again, in the spirit of looking back, exactly 10 years ago, I was here in this little cottage. This is the New Hampshire studio at MacDowell, which is an artist colony in New England in the US. And I included in the talk here because it was a very, very important, very generative time for me, and something that I still see as being very, very transformative and foundational to my work and my career. It's mostly like you're experiencing solitude in nature. It's such a kind of reverent and quiet place that they even kind of bring you your lunch in a picnic basket and like leave it quietly on your porch so that you're not interrupted or anything like that. So it was a very unique space, and one I still sort of like crave and miss all the time because I'm sort of an introvert at heart. But this was I went there to work on some things that I'd been working on for a while. These are computational poetic works, building on a system that was originally kind of analog, but then translated to computer by the poet Emmett Williams, who worked on Something Else Press in New York. He had created this sort of new form of poetry, which used a single word as a source word, and then found root words inside of that source word. And as a result, the poems kind of rhymed both like visually and verbally because you're not rearranging the verbs inside. And so I had worked with an engineer to write a program that could find Williams' words in any word, and then write more poems in this style. So because he had only done maybe 4 or 5 poems in his lifetime using this style. So this was an earlier example of one of those before I went to MacDowell. That was done. It was a collaboration with Jörg Lenny and his spray paint machine Hector at Jürgen Bay's Utrecht Biennial. But basically, because it's a spray paint machine, we use the word spray paint as the source word. And it says, "A saint I ain't, I rap and sin, I reign in print, I pray in rap, I rant in pain, an ant I ain't, I paint." So it's kind of just this like very beautiful poetic system that I've always loved and have worked with throughout my life. It's kind of a nice combination of design, literature, and art, I guess. But I was also there to read and to think. And I brought really a literal suitcase full of books to my studio. So here's a picture I took just after arriving. Books of theory and criticism, books of art and design, books about poetics, of course, and then experimental literature. And I was talking earlier with Alenka actually about books that have changed our lives, and I read one of those books during that time, and I absolutely recommend it to all of you. It's called The Interface by John Harwood, and it's about how IBM and especially Elliot Noyes, who is an architect and one of the Harvard Five, grew their design program really from typewriters to sort of like the arrival of computers and building an incredible design team inside of IBM that included, the Eameses, Paul Rand, Marcel Breuer, and all of the kind of people that came together to build IBM in mid-century. And so I've been, making websites for artists, for architects, for museums at projects for a really long time. And I sort of, initially, I think when I started making websites, thought of them as, both something that like the studio was already, established and well known for its exhibitions, for its book design. So I really thought, the web could be another thing that the studio could be known for in terms of being a cultural collaborator. But I thought about it through the lens of publishing, a more democratic way of publishing and distributing text. But when I read the interface, I really started to think about myself as someone that was making technology and culture together. And I began to sort of explore this first, not through my role at Google, but actually through my work with my students, my grad students at RISD. So there were a number of, over successive years, my workshops at RISD sort of touched on themes of technology. These are all these syllabi are online and online, so you're welcome to read them if you're interested. But basically, the first year was about content management systems, and the assignments were derived from a then popular content management system, Tumblr. The following year, we worked with Claude Shannon's famous diagram of communication, which was adapted by the Eameses into a number of films at IBM, thinking about the form of the printed circuit. Following that, we did a number of projects around design and motion graphics as ways of sort of teaching and demonstrating ideas, similar to the way the Eameses created these demonstrative films around the computer for the World Expo. Then, in the sort of aftermath of the 2016 election, the work moved into work around sentiment analysis. So we did a number of projects around how computers analyze human sentiment and the explosion of emoji, which allowed emotional markup of text by human beings, which is partly why it was enabled so broadly in platforms like Twitter. And then finally, we looked at kind of inspired by John McPhee's famous article Structure from The New Yorker about his writing process and the way he uses computers as a tool for thought, for linking his fragments of writing together and into these sort of narrative journeys that he takes. I adapted this diagram of the structure of the class from one of my favorite writers, W.G. Sebald, who talks about the quincunx, which is a way of planting trees so that they get a maximum of light in a field, so this sort of staggered way of planting trees, and he sort of morphs it in the rings of Saturn into sort of this idea of a network, of an interconnected network. So all of these sort of different classes were kind of the ways that I was starting to dabble with these ideas, but the work I did at McDowell and that sort of preceded these classes really then reverberated further into my curation of Span. So you can see John Harwood was one of our guests. It was so exciting to be able to sort of take his writing and bring him to Google. We had Paul Ford, who had just written a very important essay for Bloomberg Businessweek at the time called What is Code? We had people like Lance Wyman, who are masters of the craft of icon design, coming to talk to us as material designers working on icons for Google about that craft. Nick Benson is a stone carver, and he's also a MacArthur Genius Grant winner in the US. And so he came to talk to us about materiality and sort of working with stone versus working with print. Keller Easterling and Jeff Manna will probably be familiar to many of you, two of my favorite architectural critics, but they really think about architecture as the criticism of infrastructure, which of course is what we were making as a team at Google. And then finally, Tae-Yoon Choi, did a workshop on handmade computers. I thought a lot of designers had used computers but had never actually made a computer. And so he made it possible for us to do that. And that was the first part of the first year of Span. The second part was in London, where we continued a lot of these conversations. So we had Luna Mar talking to us about sort of programmatic programmatic design systems, the studio Yes, who were making really ambitious and unusual websites that combined music, photography, and design. Davide Fornari was doing research on Olivetti's program of culture, which was actually inspiring to Thomas Watson at IBM and led to IBM's explosion of culture in the States. So Olivetti was really first. And Davide was working on their sponsorship of an art movement called programmed art, which involved artists and machines working together. The studio Colophon came and talked about their work, and then subsequently contributed the typeface space mono to Google Fonts. Many of you have probably used that before, if the numbers are right on the dashboard that I get to see, as well as Justin McGurk. And actually, Colophon also went on to work with us on Google Sans. Justin McGurk, curator at the Design Museum in London, started a conversation with us at the time around privacy that continued in the work that we wound up collaborating with him on the California show at the Design Museum, where those objects went into their collection. And then finally, Ken Wong, who created the famous game Monument Valley, came to talk to us about spatial computing as kind of a next frontier for kind of interface systems like the kinds that we work on at Google. So it was a really amazing kind of set of conversations alongside being an outreach program. And I think something I'm very proud of. We collected texts by all of our speakers in this book, The Span Reader, which the conversation program went on for a few years after that. I programmed the LA Tokyo edition the following year, and I was the sponsor, executive sponsor for the Mexico City and Pittsburgh program after that. And so it was really cool to be able to sort of take design and Google on the road to meet audiences around the world and understand local design communities a bit better, and sort of also help have them show us all of the great things about their culture. Another thing I made while I was at McDowell, and sorry, this might be a little hard to see, but was this sort of like, I was trying to start to think about my practice as all of these things were coming together for me. And I really started to think about myself as practicing in this intersection between the academy, the studio, and the internet. And this is a diagram I showed in my talk at the Walker Art Center. But between the sort of these nodes on the triangle are sort of these intermediating ideas of one which I borrowed from Rem Koolhaas, which is this idea of a critic in the studio, that you're, and it, more and more as you become a manager and a senior manager, you are kind of culling and curating and sort of using critique to elicit ideas from your team. So I think that idea has become increasingly important to me. Another one was sort of like, books and certain types of design endure for long periods of time. But anyone, I was talking with Aiden about this the other day, anyone that's tried to sort of like show a website that they made 7 years ago, it's like inevitably broken, you don't have the right browser installed, it's very, very hard. Digital design is very brittle and very time sensitive. And so I realized that as someone that was working increasingly digitally, I needed to think a lot more about designing in my own time and embrace that idea. And then finally, I think I was interested in this sort of ground between the academy and the internet. And really, I think a lot of the work I did at SPAN was thinking about how is technology culture? How is Google a cultural actor on the same level as MoMA? How is it contributing to culture? And how is it making good culture, most importantly? Is it contributing responsibly? So I think those are all things that were sort of in my mind. And then on the last day of my time at McDowell, I wrote this proposal for, I realized I wanted more time in residency, and I wanted more time to think about these ideas. And I wrote this proposal for a project in Rome that involved sort of walks through the city and the body through space and through history, augmented by technology. And that project is ongoing, but it was really quite a time to be there, and I think a springboard for many of the things that came next. But as I'm here in an art gallery, I thought it was most appropriate and exciting to talk kind of publicly about some work that, because of the pandemic, I haven't really gotten a chance to show or discuss as much as I'd like. And I think work that really, in many ways, feels like a high point for me over the last 20 years. And of course, that's my work for MoMA. So, I've been going to MoMA since I was really little. I've always admired and been influenced by it. And the summer after I graduated from Yale, I wrote the director, who was still Glenn Lowry, just as it is today, asking him for a job. So this is this was just before September 11th, and he actually wrote me back. So I was so delighted to be able to find his response here in my archives, kindly referring me to the MoMA HR department. And I include this just for students who might be in the audience or anyone out there to say that your dreams can come true. Don't give up on them, and just stay at it. And who knows, anything could happen. So anyway, I'm inspired by this as I look back on things. But I did finally arrive at MoMA after my time at Google in 2018, just as the museum was embarking on a $450 million expansion project. And the idea was to expand the gallery space, like the active usable gallery space at the museum, by over 30%, to allow MoMA to show much more of the permanent collection rather than have it stored away, and also expand sort of the idea of modernism to be more global and more inclusive in ever-changing ways. MoMA at that time had merged the design studio into a new, larger department called the creative team that involves the groups that you see here: design, digital, marketing, and editorial on the 15th floor. So there were about 50 of us on the creative team, and I really, a lot were designers, but some were editors, some were writers, some were developers, and I really, want to emphasize how much this work is work of a collective organization, not just my work. So, huge shout out to these incredible people that made all of this possible. I think it's easiest to understand the work that we did over those 2 years in two big parts. So there's the design system, and then there's the visitor experience. And so I'll start with the design system, which is really an update or an expansion to the identity of the museum. And in many ways, we wanted to build on the museum's wonderful history. I think as a designer, anytime you're intervening in an institution, as we just saw with A, anytime you're intervening, you want to be aware of that institutional history. And so, Franklin Gothic is a typeface that so many of us connect with MoMA, and it's actually been used for like 90 years in their history. I mean, they were using it in 1930, and they've been incredibly consistent about using it since then. In the mid-60s, Shemaev and Geismar introduced these patterns to the identity for anywhere where there was like variable space, where an artwork didn't sort of comfortably fit, because you don't always want to crop artworks, you can't always get permissions for them. And so these kind of patterns were able to activate empty space, and they had these wonderful colors that came with them. In 2003, 2004, MoMA was beginning a capital campaign around expansion, and it found a tray of Franklin Gothic type in the basement that didn't quite match the cut that they were using, and so they commissioned Matthew Carter to update this cut to something called MoMA Gothic. And that typeface was used by Paula Scher when the kind of expansion, that first expansion was finally finished, and they added a blade sign on 53rd Street that sort of pokes out so you can find MoMA because it's in the middle of the block. And so, kind of riffing on that, she turned MoMA's logo on its side to kind of echo that and reserved that blade of space on the side of the layouts there. So again, this is sort of a closer look at MoMA Gothic, which was digitized by Matthew Carter. And this is the typeface that MoMA was using when I arrived, by Christian Schwartz. It's called MoMA Sans, and it was done by Christian Schwartz and Commercial Type in 2017, and it comes in 23 different weights. And the reason this was done was, number one, MoMA was beginning another capital campaign around the expansion that I was a part of. And also, the design team had been using a mixture of different American Gothics to typeset wall labels, because the one weight of Franklin Gothic wasn't enough. So it was using other weights of Franklin Gothic, but it was also using News Gothic and Trade Gothic, and they had really been wanting to sort of simplify that into a single typeface. So this work preceded me and my arrival, but we obviously were very excited to use it and see what we could do with it. But because the type had been recut, we thought the logo, also needed to be subtly redrawn. And so, again, it's a super subtle change. But this is the logo from before, and then MoMA, the one that says MoMA Sans, that's the logo afterward. And the difference is pretty subtle. I actually don't think that's such a bad thing. I think people love MoMA. They have a strong, strong connection to MoMA. This mark is very powerful to them. It almost feels like it belongs to them. And sometimes I wonder whether we redesign things too much. So maybe sometimes the way to make something powerful and enduring again is to sort of make a series of subtle and more tactical adjustments. And so there's this idea out there that I've heard different versions of. One is from the music producer Rick Rubin. Another is from the late fashion designer Virgil Abloh. Abloh talks about the idea that you can make something new by changing it by 3%. So, any change of 3% or more, it results in a new thing. And he calls this a cheat code, one of his many cheat codes for design, kind of borrowing the gamer slang there. Rubin talks about the idea that, if you change something by 3%, you can actually potentially make it 100% better. So he kind of builds on Abloh's idea. And that was really the idea, I think, that guided me and that I said hundreds of times to my team during those years at MoMA, was this idea of 3% different, 100% better. What's the sort of small change that we could make that would make a very meaningful difference in the experience and the outcomes? We weren't out to sort of throw away the institutional memory. We were just there to make it come alive and breathe new life into it in a new way. And so one of those ways was color. It's been, as you saw with the Schermayeff and Geismar system, MoMA's always not been afraid to use very bright colors. I think they're sort of an emblem for creativity in the human spirit. And so I always like to say, MoMA is black and white and multicolor. It can be very reserved, but it can also sort of turn it on and boost this sort of multiple colors all the time. And a lot of the colors that were kind of the brand colors were a little bit more mid-century, a little bit less than contemporary, and so we were searching for ways to sort of awaken the color palette a little bit more. One of those was through change. So every season we would add new colors for just that season and then let them go. But another way was to sort of speak with Glenn, our director, and say, what do you think? What for you emblemizes contemporary color? And he actually talked about this piece by Ugo Rondindoni, the Seven Magic Mountains piece, which we had actually discussed at Span LA, so I was familiar with it. And he said, this for me, it was a jolt when I saw it, and it really embodies contemporary color to me. And so we try to sort of use that as a guiding light in the color palette that we developed. We worked with a studio in Brooklyn called Order to sort of take a lot of the components that we needed and build out a design system into an adaptable set of modular layers. So here you're seeing how that system is built. It's comprised of show titles, uncropped artwork, colorful messages, and then the enduring logo, which doesn't necessarily have a position. It can move up and down and any place in this logo stack to freely combine. And so in this way, we can take a show unit like this Moreau show, and we can combine it with membership messaging. We could add multiple shows to it to talk about a season, and we could change it in different languages very easily. It was very, very flexible and adaptable. And so this is a closer look at the system. We also had images we had artist quotes in this system. We had short titles sometimes if we just wanted to sort of connect with a simple name. And we had images of life at the museum as well, of the visitor experience. So all of those things came together. We could make these ribbons with them. We could also sort of stitch those together into patchworks. So this is an installation in Greenpoint, Brooklyn that was deliberately reaching out to both younger and more international audiences. And then we could crop those patchworks. So this is an ad for the Times that you can see sort of the edges of the visitor experience there, and in these outdoor graphics as well. And then I think the most important piece was actually, most of our applications were screen-based, and there are fewer and fewer static posters in New York City. Most of the boards are actually digital boards, and so coming from material design where we had a motion system, I was very, very excited to sort of bring this to MoMA and use this tool to sort of bring life to the brand rather than change the logo. And so we actually worked with an animator named Erica Gorishow, whose firm is called Pep Rally, to build out this sort of MoMA space where all of these sort of squares and things are floating around, and there's a camera rig that actually moves up and down in this space to animate our different ads, and there's parallax that comes in from those different z depths of all of these different planes and things like that. So it really helps bring some of the dynamism of the expansion to life. And then, of course, we captured all of this with a kind of a living, breathing identity system document. So this was a website that standards.moma.org that everyone at the museum and its collaborators had access to. I'm kind of just giving you a little look behind the scenes here. But we also use this to sort of help reinforce the contributions of our department. So we could talk about how many documents had been created from this website, how many slideshows people had launched from using our templates, how many logos people had downloaded, how many new design requests they'd created using buttons from this website, and also even the time on the site, how long they were taking on a site visit. So at one point we had 8 minutes on this site of people learning about our identity at the institution. So that creates an incredible sense of commitment to it. So it's not just the design team's job to steward it, but actually everyone's job to steward it. And we created similar microsites for the signage system, motion and film graphics, accessibility needs, and other areas. And once we had this kind of system in place, we extended it to all of the on-site materials. So everything on-site was redesigned for our 2019 reopening. Here you can see some brochures, a visitor guide, invitations, and a film calendar. And we actually had a weekly meeting as a group of designers in the studio to kind of come together on how we were going to approach these, to sort of come together on which format are we going to use, which typeface are we going to, or which type size are we going to use consistently. And so actually this was kind of a big transition from working independently as a set of designers in the studio to working collectively. And it was very exciting for me to see that happen. Just to look a closer look at the film calendar. Sometimes curators would extend texts for exhibitions, and we would make brochures that you could take home. This one for David Tudor's Rainforest Show was organized by Anna Yanevsky, who some of you may know for her work on shows in Ljubljana here. Another big kind of exciting piece of the puzzle was the website. This is what the website looked like when I arrived. And it was a little bit inconsistent at this point with the design system that was starting to take root. It was center aligned, it was black and white. Images were uncropped, and really the digital media teams and the design studio were not working closely together. And I think what I really tried to do was, because I had some fluency in sort of building websites, try to build a bridge between the departments and get them excited about what we were doing with the design system. And so we actually built a working group, and in a very few months, we were able to completely redesign the website, not under the hood, but basically reface the cabinets, as we like to say, and bring a lot more of the identity to life on the website. So, we have these areas where there's a lot of color, and that really almost is like a marketing area, like a poster within the website. And then there's areas that are more research-driven or scholarly, where there's less color, and it's a little bit more of a sober experience. To do that, we basically had to create a vision and pitch it internally at MoMA that this was worth doing. So we basically got a group together, and we had 10 weeks essentially, to figure out this vision. We had a 5-day design sprint at Orders offices in Brooklyn. We invited a bunch of special guests, including some former teammates from mine at Google. And we just, we did a lot of prototyping and ideating together, and tried to sort of come quickly to a vision of what the website could be. I also worked closely with and got to refresh our design store branding. So these are just some catalogs that came out just as we were about to reopen the museum, and you can see there's sort of a little nod to moving in with people like the moving gloves and different like painting hands and things like this. These were all modeled by people at the museum, which was really fun. And we got to make some swag that was inspired by all of our new graphics, and so. This was all sort of bringing the museum to life and allowing people to engage with it. This is a collaboration with Vans, as we started to get closer and closer to opening day. This is a little look behind the scenes at how we make the catalog, and a little look also at sort of like the design for the store is actually quite different than the design for the museum. There's a lot of display work and merchandising, photography of product and things, all the things that you think of that go into kind of retailing actually. So it's a really interesting piece. And one of the first applications of this new typeface that we had called Store, which was a lighter weight that was drawn by us for by Christian Schwartz was actually putting it on the side of a building in West Kowloon Harbor in Hong Kong. So I was like, I really hope this identity sticks, because it's going to be, we can't take the sign down anytime soon. But it was very rewarding to see it in real life. And we do a lot of work also to sort of bring the campaigns to life. Sometimes we have digital graphics of the objects and other ways of interpreting them as well. And there are also like other audiences at the museum. One of those is the education audience, and I think we worked with them to kind of create a sub-brand really of the core identity, or an extension of it, that used shape, because MoMA is, we're a very boxy system, and I was interested in, could we use shape as as something that belongs to one certain group at the museum in a particular way. And so we combined shape and grid to allow the educators to sort of have a much more like templatized way of filling out like information about their programs, and then combining that with like these sort of wonderful shapes that like really brought the education system to life. And one thing they do there is also they use a lot of like materiality for work with kids and things to like understand how different mark making and materials respond. And so we brought a little bit of that into the system as well. So this system is applied to both these materials as well as projected in different spaces like the Creativity Lab here. And it's even used for a kind of learning space exhibitions like this line shape color space that we designed as well. So a closer look at that. And then finally, there was an opportunity. We were not using illustration anywhere, and so what I was really trying to do was sort of, there's the core MoMA identity that everyone recognizes, but what could you put around it that are all the different tools of graphics and form making that would sort of like bounce off of it and give it new effects? And so we thought, well, we had to brand membership, and we thought, well, for members, it's kind of cool to kind of be able to show their experience, but maybe illustration is a really interesting way to do that. And so we were actually inspired by this famous Average Day at the Museum, which is a pretty incredible graphic from the museum's 1940 annual report that shows everything from like the boiler room downstairs to like trucks rolling out with exhibitions to go all around the world, to projecting films and sending them, packaging them up to show to theaters, to the kind of clubhouse where the members and people are mixing. So we felt that this kind of like, and obviously this style is very inspired and indebted to the Gert Arndts and Otto Neurath isotype system. So we felt like this style kind of was in MoMA's vocabulary, and we worked with the illustrator Nicholas Menard to kind of bring it to life. Nicholas, it turns out, is a very close friend of Roman Muradov's, who's on my team at Notion now, so a lot of this kind of work was very nice in sort of coming together there. We also worked closely with IDEO on a business design to think about what are the value propositions at different membership levels, and how can we kind of name them and price them to think about like what members need at different levels. And so that was a really fun project to actually work on user research with our members. And this is a little bit of how it comes together in Instagram. And then, finally, I don't quite think of these as identities, but these sort of, I actually think that theater is a really good metaphor for thinking about what you're doing when you're making show graphics, because you're kind of like dressing the set in which the artwork is situated. And so, we try to have a lot of fun with these, and we don't necessarily feel wedded to the core identity. Once you're at MoMA, you're at MoMA. So we can actually start to conjure other experiences for you at that moment. So this is the first time we ever activated these glass sliding doors for art and technology in the 21st century. This was one of the reopening shows for Betcha Saar. This is a portrait of her holding Black Girl's Window, which was the subject and sort of launching point of the show. And the type, this was a lot of really awkward spaces that we got title walls for. So in this one, we kind of had to draw you in, and we used the typeface Lydian as a reference to her printmaking practice to kind of do that. It was amazing and rewarding to work with living artists like William Popel, who wanted to cut a hole in the wall so that you could see into the show, which was really amazing, and kind of confronted you with one of his Tompkins Square crawls, or Union Square crawls rather, sort of as you look down the corridor, you kind of were about to see this event unfold. So closer look at that. And then sometimes we actually adapted MoMA sands into custom variants. So this was an adaptation of MoMA sands in kind of a stitch form for the collection show, Taking a Thread for a Walk, which is all about different textiles. This is a Bauhaus textile that we use as a scrim. It's still in production, that we use as a scrim to sort of peek into the gallery. Closer look at that. Sometimes the solutions are very simple, like a paint color can really, invite and bring an exhibition to life. This is at the top of our Bauhaus staircase for, journeys of abstraction art in Latin America, and really this kind of the bounce of this kind of peach color was almost glowing like a sun as you came up the stairs. And then, sometimes it's actually useful to use MoMA sands in a very almost more label-like way for just kind of talking about shows that are derived from the collection. So here, the kind of sequencing of the artists' names is done in the order that you encounter them in the collection or in the walk around the floor. It's just a closer look at that. Yeah, using windows. And even using projection for Paul Antonelli's show, energy adapting kind of, she wanted the energy of the sun to be our inspiration, and so we tried to do a solar flare version of MoMA sands that was projected in the gallery for that. So the work of doing this involves a ton of printing, scale testing, collaboration with different vendors like the wonderful Tom Black Studios that does all of our screen printing to bring all of that to life. So I'll try to go quickly through the visitor experience here. I know I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, but yeah, basically this is the other side of the work at MoMA, is sort of trying to welcome people to a new building that they hadn't experienced before. And very kind of quickly, that building was 4,000 square feet of new exhibition space. It had a free and open ground floor that was much more welcoming for visitors. And it also had a studio where live and experimental programming could take place. There was the creativity lab that you saw earlier for visitors to be able to engage, and exchange. And it was open earlier and extended a bit later on certain nights. So, a lot to communicate. This is sort of how the new building had been messaged. When I arrived, and this was a graphic pulled from the New York Times. It was created by the architects Diller, Scofidio, and Renfrew. It's a kind of axiomatic cutaway of the building. And I think when I first arrived, the chief marketing officer, Rob Baker, said to me, it's a little hard to get excited about this graphic. It doesn't make me feel excited about the new MoMA. It's just sort of very schematic. And obviously that was its intent. But we wanted to do something that kind of shifted to something that felt a little bit more anticipatory, a little bit more celebratory. And so that's where this analysis of the street came in. We partnered with Triborough Design to sort of look at the facade of 53rd Street. A lot of museums have very iconic facades. You think about the Guggenheim, for example. Even this museum has a it's very iconic when you look at it across the city. Art space, and it's very iconic. MoMA is this sort of assemblage of different buildings on 53rd Street that are a sort of hybrid styles and things like that have just sort of slowly been progressing west since 1939. And so we were trying to think about what could we do to kind of show this, and the new buildings, I should say, was this building here, which this axiomatic grid, and then there's this staircase that Diller, Scofidio, and Renfrew were making, and then the rest of these buildings were all existing. But we wanted to show this kind of as a symphony of different styles and a celebration of all of these different kind of things merging together. And so this was coming from Triborough's analysis of starting to take those different building facades and apply those different Ugo Rondandoni colors to them as a kind of mode of celebration. And then we began to project that, kind of, again, inspired by Ed Ruscha, into these different sort of one-point perspectives to show kind of MoMA rising and the excitement rising with it, hopefully, for the new museum. So, this was a really great way to kind of activate the building before construction was complete. We used it for some of our pre-opening fundraising, and also kind of in the build-up to some of the parties and things as we invited people before they had seen the space yet. This was another way to kind of welcome them in. So once we've oriented you to kind of the 53rd Street and the new parts of the museum, we needed a way to help you navigate the building itself. And this was the existing visitor guide when I arrived. It was done in 9 different languages, each of which had a colored stripe. There were these plexiglass boxes that had 9 different compartments, and we needed to fulfill 9 different things when we ran out of them. So it was quite a difficult thing to have. It was also incredibly cheap feeling, and so no one kept it. And they would, often people would throw them away or drop them on the floors. And when we went out and read what people thought about our visitor experience, we actually heard a lot about the visitor guide. People said, this is some of the actual comments from TripAdvisor that I pulled as I was trying to make the case that we needed a new visitor guide. So, I don't really know where to start. It's really difficult to use. I wish I had got one on entry, like someone handed it to me and welcomed me, as a bit of hospitality. The gallery sequence is unclear. It's hard to read the maps. You get the idea. People hated this. And we actually learned a lot that when people, the things that people get at a museum when they're thinking about reviewing a museum and talking about their experience, the things that they keep are actually a big part of their sense of enduring connection to their visit. And so if we could improve the experience of this, we could actually get them to say this on travel sites and things. They could say this is a beautiful guide I took home with me and I'll remember my visit forever. So that actually became the driver of our work. It wasn't so much making the cheapest object and getting the most people to take it, which just creates a lot of litter in the museum and a lot of kind of waste. Instead, what we wanted to do was give very few of them out, give them in a way that really elevated what we were giving you in a way that you wanted to keep. And so that way you would actually cherish this experience in the museum. Even if you didn't buy anything at the gift store, just your map would be something that, because often if you need a map, it's your first time there. So the people that are members don't need a map. They know how to navigate. So we didn't need to make so many, and we could make them much, much better. So that's what we did. So we basically tried to bring the color system and the layer system to the tickets and the map. For the people that didn't need a map, we had this very, very small and sort of what's on guide. And we only handed this map and these tickets to you upon entry, and we only gave you one, so families would share them, actually. And the only way you could get one in the museum, there were no boxes with litter and everything. You had to ask a docent, and they would give you one. So it was actually a much more kind of interesting experience to get a guide if you needed one, and you felt much more kind of cared for as a result of that process. But this was also completely rethought in terms of how we communicated the plan to people. So this is the second floor, which has a lot of our collection floors, starting with and we were able to internationalize both by using a lot more icons instead of text, and then we were able to make something that was much more keepable by having beautiful and larger 4-color images, so that it actually was something that you'd want to keep because it had artwork on it. So again, this was all just sort of reframing the goal allowed us to make something very different. And that's what's very exciting to me about leading a team and working within an institution, is that you get to understand what are these different forces that are causing this institution to sort of not make the best decision it can, and how can you redirect that towards a better outcome. Another thing that we had to think about was this massive video screen, which comprised over 33 million pixels, and was just sort of put in the plans by Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro as a placeholder. Basically, and we call this it was called the program wall. And so basically, the idea is that you walk into the lobby from 53rd Street, and you kind of quickly got oriented, and then you figured out where you were going in the museum to kind of begin your visit. But there was no information architecture for what this would be, and we spent a lot of time thinking about. We actually put a group together called the On-Site Materials Group, which was a kind of a cross-functional group of people from different departments, all working together, that were empowered to make more localized decisions quickly so that we could open the museum on time. And so this was work by the On-Site Materials Group, which I was a part of, exploring different ways of activating these 4 screens that were part of the program wall. And here you can really see a tension between, are we communicating a curatorial program, or are we communicating an architectural program, right? What is the program wall communicating? We always knew there was needing to be, and ultimately it was both, right? We needed to create the simplest possible layout of the architectural program, because the goal of this screen was not to have people standing in front of it for hours and hours clogging up the lobby, but rather to get them to quickly choose an elevator or an escalator and ascend and begin their experience. And then also to kind of really kind of offer a little bit of the of the curatorial program that was powering the different floors and collection areas of the museum. So this is what we ended up with. It was closest to option 4. We actually did cafe studies where we went out into the lobby and we asked visitors which of these they would find the most helpful. So it was a really, we tested it on the screen, and it was just really cool to see all of this come together. And once we had that, we actually had these 3 screens that represented the 3 cores of the museum. We were able to sort of break those off into the different, little elevator lobby screens. So if you're in that core, you actually could, see the same screen that you saw downstairs and start to think about these screens not as kind of, advertisements or something like that, but really as signage, digital signage. Getting them there was a lot of work, as you can imagine. I think the aha moment was really this moment when we realized they were signage, and we needed to coordinate the sequence of what you saw in the visitor's guide, what you saw in the elevator cab, just as before you get off in a core, what you see on the screen next to that elevator when you arrive at that core, and then what you see as you progress through the galleries in these different kind of moments along the way that are guiding you to an enlarged museum experience. We needed to kind of, and so that kind of took us from digital signage into physical signage, working with kind of standardizing the type scale, thinking a lot about how to, make sure that the materials and the readability of the type was really great throughout the museum. So adding this white acrylic as a kind of way to create a little bit of a sparkle behind these letters, no matter what surface they were on. So this is all the materials that we used in the architectural signage. And then finally, there's the work of trying to figure out, the donor names and equitable ways of sort of positioning all of those and making sure that you're not overwhelming people with lots of names that they don't recognize as they progress on their way to a gallery. So we developed this system of progressive disclosure that begins with the first encounter sign, like galleries are this way, go to this way for art. And then the last encounter sign, so just before you arrive at a particular named gallery, you see a short form of that name. And then finally you arrive at the destination, and that is a more permanent kind of metal sign. So this actually was, I walked our trustees through all of these things before the museum was open in sort of a virtual turn-by-turn. It was a really exciting thing to just sort of help them understand how all of this was going to come together. So here's a closer look at just sort of some of the signs. This is signage on the Rockefeller building when you first arrive, museum store external signage, some of the internal signage, a combination of vinyl directionals and these sort of slim ticketing signs. This is a lot of signage coming together, the program wall there, some vinyl graphics. We, of course, had a donor wall combined with donor plaques and other types of things like this. We used the vertical turn of MoMA to sort of allow some signage to peek out around a corner and be more visible on the sight line. So like bathrooms, for example, were a great application of that. Signage in the sculpture garden as well. And I actually was really excited to be able to work with my old team at MoMA, at Google on icons for MoMA. So we'd always dreamed at Google on the material design team, like, wouldn't it be cool to be able to use some of our interface icons for an actual architectural project? Because a lot of architectural icons haven't been redrawn in a very long time. So I actually got to work with my former colleague, Sihi Lee, and we commissioned both, we used a bunch of existing material icons and we commissioned a bunch of new ones for the museum. So that was a really fun project. And we used those icons all over in the visitor guide, in vinyl, in digital, and other things. Putting this all together was a massive effort. It took it took like a year and a half. But I think particularly interesting was the kind of, like, we needed to make these placeholder signs to park and hold our space because there was so much stuff happening with installation and everything that sometimes we would show up and there would be a painting installed where we thought we were installing a sign. So we just had to kind of like hold our space on the walls. And we used these magnetic pin-mounted letters to be able to pull the donor signs off the wall, paint over them, and then reinsert them. So then as you go into the galleries, the signage starts to hopefully fall away and allow you to have more of an experience with the art. So these large panels sort of help you understand the theme of the floor, and the map shifts from being a horizontal that you have in the visitor's guide to a heads-up version of the map like you'd see on Google Maps where up is forward. And so, as you progress through the gallery, you got subtle reinforcements, mostly through numbers, that you're progressing to the gallery because numbers are really easy to follow and really easy to remember. If you want 404, it's easy to find. You can see the threshold there. So we did, numbering on all the thresholds as well. This was, again, work done by the on-site materials group to kind of quickly think about what's the best way for all of this signage to come together. This in-gallery signage, as we called it. And this was a moment when I kind of like had confidence that we were going to pull it off. I came to the studio early one morning, and a designer on my team had gotten there way before me and had measured the width of every threshold across all of those like 5 or 6 buildings of MoMA, and made sure that we wouldn't have to change the type size that the type size would be consistent across the entire system. So that made me really happy. That was like, okay, we must be doing something right. And this is just some different. Obviously we were excited about the new collection hang, and some of that excitement went into like, could we use new materials or new media or things like that? So this is just some like cutting room floor things, because ultimately we rejected all of this because we just realized that the art needed to be the star, not the design or the technology. And I think it's really important to kind of, when you're designing, to have a balance in mind there. So finally, there was the smallest signs in the museum, and there were, thousands of. We were reinstalling the entire museum. This hadn't been done very often. The museum was bigger than it had ever been before, and so we needed a way. If you think about a label and how it comes together, a lot of it is sort of thinking about biographical details, about the curatorial narrative, about even the checklist and things like this. So I was looking at label schedules, and 14 of the 16 weeks of label schedules was really editorial and curatorial and educational discussion that we just happened to be moving the hands and the letters around. Like, people would call us and be like, can you change this year and then send me a new version of it because I need to traffic this to whatever. So we were having problems there. We were also having problems when we did the Architecture in Yugoslavia show with diacritics, because a lot of some of the Adobe tools we were using didn't have diacritics that supported the different artists and architects that were part of that show. But the web, you don't have this problem with diacritics. And with the web, you can enable people to collaborate and edit things collectively rather than call the design department to output a new label for them. So we basically, I challenged the design team that could we make a tool to output these labels, and could we make a tool to make the collaboration of these labels something where it was self-serve rather than that we served the departments. And so we created this tool called the label tool. You put in the acquisition numbers of the objects, and then it spits out labels using the API from the MoMA.org website. You can obviously drag labels together to create group labels. You can create proofs of labels and circulate them to different departments. You can see whether they've been approved or not. So basically, we needed to do a systems analysis of the entire label writing and collaboration process in order to do what we ultimately did, which is output 3,000 labels in 1 week, the week before the museum opened, and get them installed. So it was really, really amazing to make a minor investment in a piece of technology that led to a massive better use of human beings' time and talents to be really focused on the aesthetic experience of the museum rather than the copy editing experience of the labels. And we even built in Benjamin Moore color matching to match wall colors. So this is you could specify, if you were a curator, the wall color that this art painting was hanging on. So this is just looks at different museums, labels in the museum and kind of how they work. This is an extended label. We have obviously audio guides, so you need to be able to do audio stops. All of these different teams, all inputting different information in these labels. Salon style hangs, large group labels, even like wedge labels on the floor that have a different size. All of these are output through the web. So same label, totally different process. No one was the wiser. The last thing we had to do, and I'm almost done, was we were looking at the website, and we had all of these photos of old MoMA, but we were talking about new MoMA. So we realized, oh my gosh, we need a photo library of new MoMA. And so new MoMA wasn't quite done yet, but nevertheless, we need to get this underway. And so we created 75 images of this new photo library of all of the spaces in the museum with a little bit of Photoshop work and a lot of kind of like moving some drop cloths aside or begging people to kind of install something tomorrow so we could shoot it. We tried to cast it in a way that was representative of our diverse and amazing membership. This was a little bit about what it looked like out behind the scenes. So you can literally see, like, with these Rothkos, there was like conservation work going on just beyond, or we had everything on this mobile cart that we pushed through MoMA so that we weren't too disruptive to all of the other fever of work that was going on at the same time. But these were the images that we got out of it, and I'm really proud of this work. These photographs by our photographer Noah Kalina. And initially, they were really commissioned for the website, but I think we realized quickly how much sort of life and joy they had in them that kind of conveyed the experience that we wanted people to have at the museum. So, just this running up the new staircase, almost like it was this little boy's staircase, or this woman's hair being kind of this very light and wispy object against the Sarah stacked ton boxes. The kind of interplay of bodies with the Matisse, the kind of the sense of confrontation with that on switch, those all wound up becoming an ad campaign that welcomed people back to MoMA when we were reopened. And I kind of wanted to end with this image. So in casting the shoot, a little cousin of one of our art directors was there with this kind of amazing shock of red hair, just like Vincent van Gogh. And Uniqlo is a sponsor of the museum, so we put him in some blue clothes from Uniqlo down the street. And for me, I think this image with the combination of the artwork and the audience really encapsulates, my first visit to MoMA as a little boy, where I was filled with inspiration from the arts and visual culture that I hope will propel my career for the next 20 years. So thank you all very much. I may have went long. Do we have time for questions?
Yes, if there are any questions from the audience, please just raise your hand.
Time to party.
Time to party. Well, maybe.
Hello, my name is Igor. First of all, thank you for your presentation. It was great and very inspiring. I would ask, what was the key sentences in the brief Google when you start redesign the UX? In the brief.
Sorry, it was very hard to hear. I apologize. There was an echo.
What was the brief from Google when you start on working on the new UX?
With the new UI, the brief, it was actually, it was an amazing brief. It was basically, we have this whole new set of behaviors from material design version 2. We could do things like colorize shadows, change shapes from rectangles into more complicated shapes. So could we take all of those cool new features and whip up a theme that's just for Google? Because one of the problems we had when we launched material design originally was it was a set of fixed components. And so every app started to look like every other app, and every Google's app started to look like everyone else's apps, and everyone else's apps started to look like Google apps. So, we introduced theming in material version 2, and we really wanted to make sure that our theming engine and some of our features there were robust enough so that other people could do theming for their brands. And so the brief was kick the tires and try it out. And so I put together a small working team, and we had some advocates from Creative Lab and from Search, and that group of people were sort of the ones working to prove out that the new system would be robust enough to sort of express our brand across all of our different surfaces. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool.
Hey, I know this is gonna sound like disgustingly cliche, but I want to ask you, what piece of advice would you give to young creatives?
What advice would I give to young creatives? I think that's a great question. That's like a very essential question. I think that my main advice to a young creative, since you said young, is to not give up on your dreams and to kind of don't compromise early on, stay true. I'm very, very thankful that in the first 10 years of my career, I did exactly what I wanted to do. I had my own studio. I found clients. I, made crazy work. And I'm also very thankful in the later part of my career that I'm getting to learn things like how to lead people and how to think organizationally. And there's a lot of life in a career, and there's a lot of living to do. And I think the passion needs to power you forward into the next half. So whatever you do in the early years is really going to springboard you into what's next. And I think it's so important to stay close to the things that really light a fire and make you passionate. Don't compromise.
So I guess this is then that's it. Probably we'll move then to closer to the bar and probably there's going to be some more questions. But for now, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Oh, there's one more. Okay. Sorry, I didn't see you.
Hi. How important would you say sonic identity is for brands?
Sonic identity? Super important. I mean, I think you want to have every tool. If you can use the tool to make a difference, if the tool can make the 3% difference, then why not use it? You know, I think, especially because it's like easy to change the logo, but it's also sort of, sometimes it's really amazing to keep the logo changing. Like with Salt, we changed it all the time. I mean, you just saw AA doing amazing work on changing logos, letting logos degrade. I mean, there's no one way to do it. You know, it's sort of what is the brand need in this moment in its history and for the audience it's trying to reach. But I'm thinking a lot about sonic branding right now for Notion in particular, because we have this wonderful jazz. Our founder loves jazz and improvisation, and we've used a little bit of jazz in some of our tutorials and things. But it's like okay jazz. It's not like great jazz, and it's not like interesting jazz. And I'm like, well, that seems like we could make a 3% difference there, right? Like we could actually do something really interesting, and make our sound world different than what a normal software product sounds like. So I'm thinking a lot about sonic branding right now. We thought a lot about it on Material too, in terms of pings and beeps and boops and like basically things that especially on the hardware devices that you needed for feedback.
Thank you.
Maybe it's too generic, but I would like to hear from you, what is the meaning of graphic design for you?
Oh, what's the meaning of graphic design? That's a great question. I think graphic design is a very collective way of making, a very social art form. And so for me, what I like is that graphic design involves working with lots of people, and it involves working in the world. And that's not to contrast it to any other art form, but I think those are the things that make it meaningful to me, is the way that it brings groups of people together to communicate things and make experiences in the world. So it's not limited to just pure graphic form for me. I think it's actually more about the human enterprise of design. I mean, Charles Eames always says design is a plan for action, and I like that idea of a collective coming together for action. So that's I guess how I would define it for myself.
Maybe it's in black and white. Is it craft or art?
Craft or?
Art.
Art. Not an interesting dichotomy for me. I guess broadly, it's graphic design. I'm going to dodge it. Not my terms. No,
yeah,
I don't think I'd make the contrast.
Okay, there was one more in the back.
Hello, Helena, pleased to meet you. Couple of times you mentioned in the presentation, obviously, the process you were working with your teams. The bit that interests me more is at the end you have to pitch to the boss. So how is that process to get them to say yes? Because they entrust you with the creativity that you do, but then they also have to accept it if they like it. So how is that process with the pitch and then getting your work accepted?
That's a great question. In my experience, it works a lot of different ways. So, I remember when I was at Projects, and early in my career when I was designing a lot of books, you would go in, you would bring your books, you would show the portfolio. People would say, "I want you to design my book for me," and then you design the book. You'd invoice the first half. You get the second half when the book was done. So you were only pitching once, right? Maybe you were showing work on the book, but in a sense, to win the work or to win the permission to do the work, you were only doing that once. As I started to work on websites, we were needing to get permission for each next phase of the website. So it was almost like we were pitching as we were making. And when I got to Google, it was like there was absolutely no distinction because we were in-house. And it's an engineering culture there. So one of the ways that you you know that an engineering culture works is that you demo all the time. You demo what you're working on. So as a designer, you also demo, and you open up your screen and you show what you're doing. And so I think what that means is that the process of getting permission, but also educating stakeholders is continuous, as opposed to something that is sort of a milestone. And so I think one of the things I can remember is trying to sort of pitch the speakers for SPAN to Matthias Duarte, who was our VP, that was sort of the sponsor of that program. And it was a conversation, you know, a long conversation over the ways that he wanted Google to enter the world and begin a dialogue, and the people that could unlock that dialogue in different locations and things like that. I think now, working more and more institutionally and in-house, I also see that sometimes it's important to have sort of a protected enclave or like tiger team, or sometimes it's important to even unlock competitiveness across two teams, like a red team and a blue team, you know, to allow a marketplace of ideas to flourish. You know, I think part of my job as a creative lead is not to sort of like, you know, triple down on a single idea, but really like surprise the organization with what it could be capable of. Because creativity is a making engine, you know, and so we're, you know, at Notion, for example, we're making lots of things that are wild and crazy, and maybe we shouldn't do them, but no other team is making anything. So we're the only team that's making because we're the creative team, so we create. And I think that then creates possibilities for the direction that things could go, some of which we won't proceed with and others of which we will. But I think that to me, it's like that critic in the studio muscle of how do we edit, how do we call, how do we learn what stakeholders, what their vision is and how they express it through creativity by what they select. You know, and never always having more ideas behind the ones we have, you know. So I think there's a whole mix of, but at MoMA, for example, like the only way we could get the website done was to have this little protected little team that was just gonna go make it and then show it and be like, can we have a bunch of money to really do this, you know? And that worked because people were shocked at how much better the website was. So, you know, sometimes it's about cutting out the conversation, and other times it's about really like, you know, developing the conversation. And I think you just have to get a feel for, there's no one way, but I think you have to just get a feel for your stakeholders and know that there's a lot of ways to solve the problem. Yeah.